Welcome to Rates and Barrels. It is Thursday, March 30th. Derek and Riper back from paternity leave, leg one, along with Eno Saris. Eno on the road, celebrating opening day in Brooklyn this year. What brings you to Brooklyn, Eno?
We have a super event tonight at Other Half. We're going to be debuting my beer, Staring into the Shift, a hazy pale ale with Other Half Brewing, and then my sandwich that I did together with the head chef from Philly, Other Half, Ryan McLaughlin. We've been working on a sandwich for like a year now. And the result is a breaded and fried pork cutlet, but it's more complicated than that. It's kind of like, well, you're from Wisconsin. It's a breaded and fried head cheese.
Yeah, okay.
And so then we put a matbucha sauce around it, which is a Israeli tomato sauce, and some greens that have been tossed in a mustard vinaigrette.
Sounds like a great sandwich. Lots of flavors,
ciabatta.
lots of textures.
It's going to be good.
Yeah.
Then we'd have a panel tonight. The RSVPs are full. And if you are listening to this before the panel and you have RSVP'd, know that people shared the Evite after it was supposed to be closed. And there are lots of people RSVP'd on there and limited space. So I would come early.
Well, yeah, there might be a few people that get to hear this before the event starts, but the timing on that is dependent upon the little guy. Actually, the son of mine. He's erratic. He is wonderful, but he is erratic. He has thrown a wrench into my previously well organized schedule. The Google Calendar of my life has just been absolutely decimated over the last 6 weeks. Couldn't be happier. A lot of folks reached out and said some really nice things, sent nice emails. I got a few gifts actually. This is the most incredible gift I've ever received right here. I'll hold up to the camera if you're watching on YouTube. This came in from, I believe, listener Daniel. And it's a Victor Robles rookie with an autograph and a jersey patch. And I did see that Victor Robles had a great spring. I caught that in my limited viewings of various spring training games and news snippets and 3:30 a.m. Twitter storms. I see the same guy. I took a quick look. I couldn't hold back. I couldn't just say, all right, I'll trust this. I'm back in. I had to look and see, is he hitting the ball harder? No, he really isn't hitting the ball harder. Does this matter? No, this really doesn't matter. So Victor Robles will always have a special place in my heart, but he has absolutely no place on any of my rosters this year. Zero exposure to Victor Robles for me in 2023.
Yeah, I've got somebody like that. Jarrell Cotton is probably my version of that. I will always watch him. I'll always wait for that crazy-ass changeup, and I will never put him on a team of mine.
If it comes down to the point where Victor Robles jerseys are going for $10, $20 at TJ Maxx in the DC area, I'll get one. I'll find a way. I'll get one. As a memory. Maybe I'll put it on the wall. More likely, I'll just wear it once in a while to drafts or something, and people will get a pretty good laugh out of it. I did see our friend Jeff Zimmerman making a really good point. I think this was a couple days ago now about taking a moment as the season begins to look back at draft season and just take some inventory of what you did. What happened when you employed various strategies? What situations were you in? Because the problem solving we just did over the better part of the last 6 weeks, but for some people like 6 months, if you go all the way back to the fall. I mean, I was drafting back in the fall because I'm a weirdo. You will forget those things if you are focused entirely on the games that are happening. So it's important to just stop, gather your thoughts, write it down, talk it out, and then check in, make sure like, hey, did these theories, these ideas I had about the rosters, the A-B sort of decisions I made, did I get them right? Did I get them wrong? I do think that's a really important thing to try and do right now because it's harder to do it later. You can look back at your roster and remember some of it at the end of the season, but then you have more results-based analysis that's like, oh, my team was good, and why was it good? But you didn't really like find out the things that really kind of put it over the top.
Yeah, I have something when you were talking that what came to mind was, I had a fairly light NFBC season this year because I don't know why. This is how it broke down. And so I only have 2 draft champions leagues, but the first one I was all excited to get all sorts of young pitchers that I was I thought I would be out in front on, like your Kyle Bradish and Hayden Wesnenski types. And that's all fine and good. They are in the rotation, but they're not pitching in the first week. And so I have on that league, I think 4 relievers. One of them's a closer in there. That's also a league where I just got hit in the groin by injuries. I started with Edwin Diaz in the second on an auto pick.
Oh yeah, that's a famous squad on this pod.
Yeah, Reese Hoskins was my first baseman, and Tyler Glasnow, pre-early injury, was like my second pitcher or something. So that one is doomed to fail. I don't think it's going to go anywhere. I think it's already dead in the water on day one. But one thing that I did learn from that, in my second one, I took a lot more guys that you would consider boring, but are now starting in week 1 and making me feel pretty good about this staff. And these types we went hard on as well in my main event. So these are the boring pitchers that I think will be meaningful. Guys like Luis Garcia, Spencer Turnbull, Jose Urquidy, Nate Eovaldi. Those aren't necessarily upside picks, and yet I think they're going to be really important. In my main event, we've got guys like Aaron Savali, Jameson Taillon, I have a lot of shares of, Spencer Turnbull again, Jordan Montgomery, just innings, like decent innings. And if you have decent, healthy innings, then you have choices, and then you can play matchups, and I think that sometimes, and I think the reason why I bring this up right now is because we're going to have some breakout performances in the first week, right? In the first, even for 4 days, somebody's going to pitch really well, and you're going to be like, oh, Graham Ashcraft pitched really well against Pittsburgh at home. And then somebody's going to be like, do I drop Nathan Eovaldi? Or do I, you know what I mean? Like there's going to be like, do I drop this kind of boring veteran? And I would say, try to do something else. Like try to keep the boring veterans, because they give you options. The more of those guys you can have, the more options you can have, and the more you can weather injuries, and the more you can start to do 2 start weeks from your own bench, where you take a guy in weekly lineups and take a guy off your own bench and put him in. It's just those guys are useful, even if Spencer Turnbull has a 99 stuff plus and, isn't super exciting. He's a useful guy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge I ran into with pitching throughout draft season is that I felt like I was getting too much value on the Clayton Kershaw, Luis Severino, Tyler Glasnow, the Freddie Peralta, Dustin May, Chris Sale. Those guys are some of my most heavily rostered pitchers across everything. I'm in 7 different leagues on the NFBC site. That doesn't sound like a lot when you are then told that only 2 are online championships, 2 are draft and holds, one's TGFBI, one's a main event qualifier, and the other one is a satellite. And I didn't play the big auction this year. I didn't play the main. The main reason for me, honestly, there were so many nights in the last 10 days, especially after the main event weekend. I'd look at my phone. I'd be up, be feeding Braden, be like 4:30 in the morning. And I'd have FOMO. I'd be looking at draft boards or something just to stay awake. And I go, oh, there's still a few spots left in the main. Oh, there's a 10 a.m. main on opening day. He's usually up around 6. Maybe I could do this. And then I'd get a nap, and the rational part of my brain would say, you're going to spend $17.50 on an entry for a 7 a.m. draft when you're getting broken up crap sleep. You haven't been as connected to the game as you normally are because of this life event. You're going to go play in those conditions. You're an idiot. So I think what happened, fortunately, with the auction was enough people just kind of piled in over the weekend to fill the spots. Auction temptation went away, and that's a longer time commitment. The main was a little bit harder for me to actually pass on because it just kept each day would pass. Like, oh, there's still a spot there. Maybe I'm meant to be there. But I'm okay with this. I got a couple shots at the big prize in the online championship. Right, there's a ton of money up for grabs in that overall contest. There's a lot of teams in it, and I took that high risk, high reward pitching build and I used it because I think that's one of the ways to actually do really well in an overall contest. You have fortunate luck with pitching injuries. You have guys that haven't thrown a lot of innings that hold up and actually give you the innings that you're looking for. So this is the typical Derek rotation for this year, right? I get an ace. I got Woodruff on this particular team. Got him in the 4th round. Josh Hader as a closer, picked him in the 3rd because I felt like there was going to be a little run at that 3-4 turn. I heard you talking about one of your teams, and just if you don't like the back end of the first closer group as much, you don't really want to overpay for those guys. Like if that's Presley or Romano, whoever that is for you, it's different for everybody.
It also depends on your draft slot. There's a big draft slot thing there where you just know you either have to jump a guy a full round or you aren't going to get one.
And I was smack dab near the middle with pick 6. And I just felt like I was vulnerable to runs on each side of me really easily. And I've had so many drafts this draft season where I was on an end. I felt like I could like dictate tempo and get whatever I wanted and pivot more easily because you can change direction with greater magnitude with 2 picks at a time. But when it's 1 pick, wait 12, you're just at the mercy of everything that happened. I got beat up by not an early catcher run, but what I felt was like a good catcher run in that pick 100 to 125 range. MJ Melendez, William Contreras, Sean Murphy. I had this attitude.
They went bop, 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 and we managed to get MJ Melendez, and we were happy about it, and then it just went crazy right after that.
Right. I was sitting there. I was like, this is going to be the round. I'm going to get my catcher. And I was really like pretty laid back about which one I was going to get. And I got 0 of them because I just played that game of chicken too long. There's always going to be a cost to those types of decisions. It could have happened at closer. I didn't want it to happen at closer in a league with an overall prize. So I went Hader in the 3rd, Woodruff in the 4th. I ended up getting another closer. I didn't do this as much this year as last year. I went Felix Bautista in the 6th, where I did the 2 closers somewhat early. Part of the reason I did it, though, is because it's a 12-team league. I felt like the concerns we have in a 15-team league don't all port over quite the same way. And I think the waiver wire can be a lot more kind to your draft day errors if you decide to be a little more aggressive with certain categories or certain positions. So the question is going to come down to whether or not the guys behind Woodruff, Kershaw in the 9th, Freddie Peralta in the 12th, Tyler Glass now in the 14th, obviously hurt already, Tyon in the 20th, Jack Flaherty 21st, Zach Eflin in the 22nd, and a couple dart throws late, Ryan Pepio, Graham Ashcraft, and then a closer, Jonathan Hernandez, maybe in the 25th round. I have one of the most injury-prone groups of pitchers you could possibly have, but I think I did it in the right place, in the right kind of league, with opportunities to go after guys like Ashcraft or whoever it is that pops in these early weeks, because I do think you can turn over a couple spots on a pitching staff in a 12-team league in the first month and end up going from high risk to steady floor and high ceiling. I think it's possible to do. You just have to be really sharp on the wire.
Yeah, one thing that I struggle sometimes to talk about things that are relevant to all sorts of different players and different settings. And I'm looking at my player shares over at NFC, and one of them is just like super specific to 2 catcher leagues. I have a bunch of shares of Keibert Ruiz, and I can't tell you that I think he's necessarily going to break out. And I can't tell you that he should be a 12-team catcher or I don't even know if he's a 15-team one catcher. But I do have him in a few places across different formats because he just makes a lot of contact, and I think he'll be decent. And I think catchers are undervalued. The catchers that can actually have some offense are undervalued in most leagues. It's definitely something I saw when I did values versus ADP in NFC. For the main, we saw that catchers were, as a unit, undervalued by the market. And so that's something that we wanted to do. So we ended up with MJ Melendez and Keibert Ruiz as our starters, and we feel pretty good about that. I am not a proponent of really punting that position, because a lot of times you end up with the worst players in the game. Like literally back half catchers are the worst players in the game offensively. So I'd wanted to not have that. But a different player that I think is more universal to all settings, and representative of another pocket of value that I saw this draft season. I wonder how it'll continue into the season. But Josh Naylor is a guy I have everywhere, and he was, really important to my run last year in labor, and yet I have him again in a lot of places because I found that mid-tier first basemen were also underrated when I looked at my numbers. And so that includes like Rowdy Tellez, Andrew Vaughn, Josh Naylor. There's a whole grouping there of first basemen that kind of go from 150 to 200, and I like almost all of them. And so if you didn't get Vlad or any of the top first basemen, and I'm not saying don't take a top first baseman, but if you went with speed or if you went with a positional value, do not fret. There are guys there later, and a lot of them are lefties that are going to benefit from the shift rules. So if Naylor's out there in your 12 team as a free agent, I would consider adding him. Like I think he's relevant in all leagues, and I think he'll be a pretty good player this year.
Yeah, I think that was definitely a consistent pocket of value across all drafts I was in. I don't feel like that's a bottom could fall out sort of group the way that the high risk, high reward pitchers with arm injuries in their past and back injuries in their past will be. So I felt comfortable doing that a lot. I think Josh Bell is one of my most rostered players. Got him in 4 leagues this year
too. Yeah,
yeah, he was in there. There was one team I think I have Bell and Naylor. I'm like, I don't care. It's first base and DH. It's a pretty good lineup. I think they're both going to meet their projections. They're both underpriced. This makes sense to me.
And you really don't want to cheap all the way out on first base.
No.
If you're in like a super deep league or something, like the very bottom of first base is a real problem.
Did you find anyone who emerged from the depths of first base over the course of spring that you started to trust? I was in an AL only league last night, and that was the worst first base cluster I could remember. Being a keeper league too, that took away the best options, and it was an absolute battle of attrition, just trying to find someone who would play, keep the job even part-time, and not actively hurt you while doing it in a mono league. So I had a pretty deep look at the pool, and I didn't like what I saw.
Yeah, and it led to a panic move on my part in AL Labor. So that's why I have an $8 Spencer Torkelson in AL Labor, because I looked beyond him and saw the void and panicked. What you did mention, did someone sort of play themselves into better graces, and it's just luck. I did not really see anything in Spencer Torkelson before this spring that I liked, but this spring he's hitting the ball hard. So I do like when people hit the ball hard, and he's been doing that this spring. And I think also the Christian Pache deal for the A's means that Seth Brown is probably a little bit safer than I had thought he was before. He's an only league play, though, I think, because the batting average is going to be pretty bad.
I started to soften my stance a little bit on Joey Meneses over the course of the spring. Maybe the World Baseball Classic, the big home run with the epic bat flip, maybe that helped kind of sway me in that direction. But the more I looked at the quality of the contact he made, the less my initial, maybe this is another Frank Schwindel cloud that I put over him, the less I really believed in that. I didn't rally back and draft 2 or 3 teams with Meneses on it. But he's one of those guys, if I'm wrong about him, everybody else got a bargain. That works against me. So my terrible call at the beginning needs to somehow come through in the form of the playing time being less than we expected. I'm not rooting for an injury, more just that they rotate him a little bit more because they don't see him as a long-term player there. But man, I kind of think I got that one wrong already, and they haven't even played a game yet.
He's also falls into an interesting class of players that played in the WBC, and so you might think they didn't play much or they struggled. I think I even made the mistake talking about Trace Thompson, being like, oh, the Dodgers aren't playing him much. He was in the WBC, fella. And Joey Meneses, we were doing the Friday pod with Al, and he mentioned something about Joey Meneses struggling in the spring. And I was like, yeah, with the Nationals, it didn't look good. But if you flip over to the WBC page, he definitely did a little better over there. Masataka Yoshida is someone, if you look at the spring stats, you might have a very different opinion if you didn't watch any of the WBC. So Yoshida is a guy that I have taken a shot at in 2 or 3 different places. And I was a little disappointed that he struck out some in the spring, but in the WBC we saw why I like him, which is I think there's a chance there for like Stephen Kwan with more power, and that's pretty exciting. So Yoshida is on my labor squad. He's in a couple other places. Did not get him in the main. The sharps were too sharp.
Those rooms are incredibly difficult. So yeah, good. Totally understandable that you'd miss out with spring seemed to matter a lot this year because of the WBC. I think there were people that were reacting to things in the tournament that ordinarily wouldn't have moved the needle if they had just happened in the Grapefruit League or the Cactus League. I think you can get a bump from spring training games in the States, but I think that bump from a good WBC performance on a global stage, I think that actually does have more of an impact on what people are doing at the draft table.
Yeah, and it seemed to have an inconsistent but important role in roster decisions this year. I can't help but think of the Orioles sending Grayson Rodriguez down after a poor spring, but not rostering Franchy Cordero after a great spring. Yet the Yankees signed Franchy Cordero minutes later.
Ooh.
It's I think one of the most awkward things in baseball is making a decision off of, it's not even 6 weeks because they don't play full games. They take days off. So it's almost like 3 or 4 weeks worth of stats with a player. So I think we were looking at plate appearance leaders, and I think Michael Tolio with 83 plate appearances was like one of the spring leaders. So you're going to make your decision off of 83 plate appearances. What was the news? I think he got sent down.
Yeah, he ended up getting sent down.
led his team in plate appearances, gave them what they wanted, led the entire Cactus League in RBI, I think. And your reward is to be sent down. So there's a lot of other consideration always. There's long-term development considerations, short-term roster value considerations. If I use this guy, then I lose this guy who's out of options, that sort of stuff. So I think a lot of times if you just follow who has options, that's actually probably the best way to figure out who's going to make a team.
Thinking back to some other draft season lessons, I think this can fall under that category too. What about Helium when it comes to prospects? Anthony Volpe is the best example of it. Jordan Walker was another example of it. Well, back when we recorded our position previews in late January and February, Walker was a fringe top 200 guy in terms of his draft champions ADP. And I think as it became increasingly realistic for him to carve out a spot in the opening day roster, of course, his ADP took off. Anthony Volpe, same sort of thing. Very reasonable to get him up until about a month ago. And then things changed a lot, especially as those higher stakes leagues started to happen in the last couple of weeks. Do you see those guys when they jump and say, I'm out because they jumped? Do you see them sometimes and say, I'm in because they jumped? I agree with the people that are taking them now. The thing we needed to see has been proven. Like, what do you take away from those really exciting players that everybody has FOMO for that just erupt up the draft boards? It happens every single year. I don't know if it's a one size fits all sort of thing, but I tend to find myself once the price goes up, I just say, I'm out. I was throwing darts occasionally on guys like that back in January. I'm good. I'm not paying full freight at the end of March.
If we asked a projections guru like Derek Carty, I think for the most part he'd be out. When his projections are pretty harsh on rookies because he does a fair amount of regression, and that regression, is baking in the risk that not only does the player not make the big leagues, but even if he does make the big leagues, he may not, be much. Like there's always sort of a 50% bust rate. However, that 50% bust rate is lower on the top prospects. So I have an ear for a top prospect play. Julio Rodriguez was huge for me on my main last year. However, I don't want to pay the peak price, when the hype is at its frothiest. So I kind of wish that my main had been a week earlier, because I did have this inkling of a thought that, yes, Jordan Westberg is still in camp, and there are other players that are still in camp that might be there because the team has split squads, or they just need people, or they just want to get as long a look, and because Westberg is coming, but he might not be coming on day one. That sort of thought process. But when I looked at the Yankees, I thought, man, they just did Oswaldo Peraza. His name was IKF. His name was Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. They're not going to do that again. They're itching to put somebody that has some offense at that position. They're itching for Anthony Volpe. So 2 weeks ago, I could have gotten Anthony Volpe at 200. And I would have, But last week, by the time that I was drafting, Volpe hype was in full gear, and he would have cost me, I think, a 120. Now, 120, I just see too many players with high floors that are very useful. And there's still, at that point, some risk he doesn't make the team, and then risk compounded on top of that he doesn't have a good debut. I mean, that's all in the package. So I don't want to pick the peak price, but I will. There is a price that I am in because there are young. So we did pay the price at 140, or where I would have liked to take Volpe. Volpe was gone, so we took Grayson Rodriguez as our rookie shot in the dark. So I did take a shot in the dark, and I maintain that I think I'm going to argue with my co-owner that we should keep him for the month that he's down, because the other name that we had circled there was Tyler Glasnow. So there are points in every draft where I will take a big risk, a health risk, a prospect risk. But I think generally in the top 100, I don't want to. I want to be as risk averse for as long as possible so I can take better risks later.
Yeah, I think you also, at least this is how I see it too. I think it's easier to let those players go if you get bad injury news, if you take them a little bit later. If you take them after pick 200, you can accept that in a 15-team league. You say, well, this is a 12th round pick and he's going to miss 4 more weeks or 6 more weeks. Fine. I have to just accept this as a sunk cost. If you drafted that player at pick 75, pick 90, you're a lot more likely. There's a psychological
aspect to it,
You have to know yourself. You have to have that skill and the ability to just accept it if it's not going to work out. But a lot of people, and I'm one of them, don't necessarily have the discipline to make that decision correctly in season, and that becomes really costly because you're not going through that churn. You're not going through the waiver wire. You're not taking chances on streaming pitchers or other exciting players who are playing more, who could actually make a really positive impact on your roster.
Yeah. I mean, those are all different factors, but I would never. I try not to have really hard and fast rules. There are certain rules that can guide you, but if you have too hard and fast of rules, they can also hamstring you. I think of this also in the type in the like player types. Yes, I like guys who make contact and have a good sense of the zone. But if Jazz Chisholm is there for me at the right price, I cannot have a hard and fast rule that says I'm just not going to take anybody that I don't like their plate skills that much. Because Jazz Chisholm is a hell of an athlete, and there are players that can sort of perform despite. And Javi Baez was a great player in his prime. I would never have signed him to that long-term deal, and I'm not necessarily in now, but the price is dropping, and maybe 1 year at the end of his career, I will get one of those last 260, 16 or 230, 16 homers, 8 steals, and I got him for $2 kind of seasons.
Yeah, I mean, he ended up being a very consistently affordable player. I think in main events, just outside the top 150 was his final ADP. If you wanted a boatload of playing time with the possibility of both power and speed, pretty good counting stats, you could afford the batting average hit. I think he actually makes value pretty easily from that spot. Would you be that surprised if we're drafting Javier Baez earlier in 2024 than we were in 2023? I don't think I would be.
Yeah, that's totally possible.
I think the bigger question, though, that comes kind of out of this conversation about Volpe and young players, like, why did they make the opening day roster for their teams? Volpe and Jordan Walker. What really moved the needle? What mattered? Because I saw a whole bunch of analysis, again, and bleary-eyed, exhausted. I don't know who was throwing it out there. I wish I could give credit. But I saw takes that were pointing to Volpe's time at AAA and the 30% K rate there being a reason why he wasn't ready or why he might struggle. And I looked at that and I said, that's 22 games. I think the 110 games Volpe played at AA last year probably tell us a lot more about what he's likely to do in the big leagues this year than those 22 games at AAA last year are going to tell us about what he's going to do in the big leagues this year. And I think with Jordan Walker, it's kind of a similar thing because going into draft season, if things broke a certain way, it was very reasonable for him to go to AAA for at least part of the season, just to show age to level would be very appropriate. He's 20. He's going to turn 21 in May. And last year was 119 games at AA. Did everything you could possibly want to do, age to level. But I wonder what it was. Was it really the spring performance? Was it something over the course of the winter? Or was it something we can already see somewhere on the stats pages, in the underlying data? Why did these guys make the opening day roster, whereas someone like Vaughn Grissom didn't? The easy answer on Grissom is defense. But there are players that are in this range.
Jordan Westburg.
Yeah, similar resumes. Mm-hmm. Clearly an opportunity where the player blocking them is not good enough to block them. And the organizational decision is, now we're going to wait. And I really have a hard time figuring out from my vantage point which of those situations are going to trend with the rocket ship ADP going up and which ones are going to result in the going down to AAA and not going to be able to roster them in a redraft
how do we
league.
Spot next year's version, right?
Yeah.
And a few things come to mind. One is, I would say, something I'd want to check is finishing school. And so finishing school in this case for Jordan Walker was the AFL. And finishing school for Volpe was, I think, a combination of AAA and spring. So what those are reps against quality opponents at a high level in places that are considered sort of the next step is the major leagues. And there are plenty of players that we saw at the AFL that made their debuts the next season. We saw Trout versus Harper. We saw, Acuna down there. We saw all sorts of people there that were like, hey, this is you extending your season so you're ready for a full big league season. This is you getting some good reps in front of everybody, and this is us telling you we're going to be aggressive with your assignment next year. I think that's something. So I think, seeing somebody who's pretty advanced go to the AFL, that would be something that I would notice. Somebody that, going to AAA that's young, I think that's really interesting. And the next box that I want clipped is the major league team is competitive. I actually think you want the major league team to be competitive because if the major league team is not competitive, there are too many incentives to play service time games. Endy Rodriguez, and this is a small one, and it's not a big deal. The Pirates probably should do something like this, but Endy Rodriguez is ready, and they don't really have a good catcher in Pittsburgh. If Pittsburgh was good this year, Endy Rodriguez would be the open day starting catcher. Like if they were ready to, compete for the playoffs, I think Endy Rodriguez would start, day one as catcher.
Yeah, I was wondering about Bo Naylor kind of in a similar vein, and maybe his ADP was a tick high for, I don't know, the lack of certainty about his roster spot. I thought it was pretty well certain.
He ticked my boxes and didn't make it, right?
He did everything. I thought he did everything he could do to at least share with Mike Zunino. I thought the Zunino signing made sense. Zunino's a righty, Naylor's a lefty. If Naylor struggles, he's more of a backup in year one. It's a 1-year deal for Zunino. Zunino handles the staff well. Okay, that all sort of makes sense.
Apprenticeship.
Yeah. If there's something defensively you want Naylor to work on, he can work on it with someone that you trust to handle your staff. Okay, that all sort of makes sense to me. Why they demoted him, I really don't know. That one's a little harder for me to understand. The Grissom one, I mean, I'm not an expert in defensive ability. I know there were people that had questions about Grissom as a shortstop prior to this even being a possibility. So those were not new questions that surfaced. So maybe we shouldn't have been as surprised by the way that unfolded. I think they really surprised us though, because they didn't do the Tolia thing. They didn't take Grissom and just keep throwing him out there day after day after day after day.
Yeah,
there was that
weird. There was
weird
like
stretch of like 5 days. Yeah, 5 days where he didn't play shortstop or didn't play, and it was like, oh, is he hurt? And then we get the news, no, he's going down. It's like, what? Like, shouldn't you be maxing out his opportunities in spring? Just even if you're still going to send him down anyway, shouldn't you be getting a look at him in your infield and just letting him solve the problem with the other guys he's going to be playing alongside at some point? I thought that was really strange.
So the Orioles are not a great test case for the Guardians, but I wonder if catcher is just its own beast. Because I'm looking at Adley Rutschman, and he had 185 plate appearances at AAA to finish 2021. So he had his quote-unquote finishing school. The Orioles weren't competitive, so they didn't really need to put him in, but they didn't put him in until a sort of a month had gone by, which is the kind of service time aspect of it, I think. But also, he's a catcher, and so it's pretty easy to say he needs help on something that you guys can't measure, and nobody in the media can. Like, he needs to work on his game calling. Oh, good. There's no game calling metric, so we can't call you out on that. I'm being cynical. But
no, it is one of the things that
catching is tough.
You can get away with that as an explanation a little bit easier, because the nerds pointing to self, like, we can't just point to something. No, here's proof. He can do that. He is good at this. He should be playing ahead of this guy. We can quantify it in many instances. There's still a handful of ways that we really can't do it, and it's an easier out from the PR damage control perspective. But Logan O'Hoppe made the Angels, right? And it is
there's a competitive team though.
So are the Guardians. That's why the Bo Naylor thing confuses me.
Right,
I think Bo Naylor makes them better, even if he's catching half the time. I think Bo Naylor makes the Cleveland Guardians a better team, and I think they seem both reluctant to deal their upper level prospects, because I made that case, I don't know, last summer, I guess it was, for them to be the team to go get Juan Soto. Of course, they didn't. Spoiler alert, they didn't play out that way. And they're not really promoting those guys aggressively. They're coming eventually, but they're like leaking into Pittsburgh territory. I mean, I know they're very close geographically, so like maybe the whiffs of Pittsburgh Pirate air have kind of made their way to Cleveland or something, because they're being really cautious about promoting the current group of prospects that they have. And I've been throwing darts at Tanner Bibby and Gavin Williams, trying to get help on the pitching side. I've been wondering if they're going to try and bring up Valera or Brian Rocchio to play in the middle infield. And it's just waiting and waiting and waiting, and I can't figure out why.
Okay, so add the third box you want to check is team factors. Just a sort of soft box is team factors. How aggressive have they been with young players in the past?
Yeah,
that probably absolves us. That probably resolves all of our different cases that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's where, it's defense, historical team tendencies, and then finishing school.
How much does I wonder what the team tendencies are with the Yankees? I think that the Yankees will play a rookie. It's just that they usually have such high price options in every place that they're usually like a free agent there. You know what I mean? Like, and this year, I think the news is that Oswald Cabrera did win left field. So Hicks is more of a temporary center field replacement, and then maybe taking a back seat to Cabrera in left field, despite his contract. And at the same time, Volpe looks like he's being installed at short. So it's that's a bit of a 1 year change in terms of maybe how they've maybe changed. I don't know. The Yankees, that's a little bit tough, but I say if you have those three boxes and two of the boxes are checked very strongly, then you can start to get interested in a guy. I don't know who it's going to be next year that's going to rise or but let's say Jackson Churio, makes it through, has Double-A and goes to AFL next year. All right. Jackson Churio does Double-A, goes to NFL next year, and Garrett Mitchell and or Tyrod Taylor had poor years. I would say Jackson Churio could be somebody that you could take a shot on next year.
Right. I think if he
Depending on
doesn't,
like if he was good in all these places, you know. I mean,
well,
I'm
yeah.
sort of saying,
So
like,
he'd finish the year this year presumably at AAA without that late season debut, which is
go to
totally
the
possible.
AFL.
Yeah, but he'd go to the AFL, he'd play well there. He'd be an easier case for people to make because he'd have that highest level of the minors plus the AFL.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Walker didn't. Volpe only had that brief time. So I think you'd be looking at something in the neighborhood, not sort of ADP that we saw on Gunnar Henderson or Corbin Carroll, because we saw them in the big leagues at the end of last year, but probably not quite as cheap as 2022 Julio Rodriguez, not quite as cheap as the start of draft season prices on Volpe and Walker for someone like Churio, because he's already got that hype. Like it's coming from every corner. He's had more than a year where that question of who's the best player you've seen in the minors this year, the common answer to that question was Jackson Churio last year. That was the guy, and the hype keeps coming out from the organization too. So I think they see him in their outfield as soon as possible. I really think they could push him up at the end of this year if there's an actual need at that time.
Amazing. That would surprise me a little bit. Then otherwise, if you're kind of looking at top prospects now, I don't see an immediate candidate. I guess there's an idea that Marcelo Meyer is going to be due in Boston in 2025, but I could see him. He's going to. I don't know where he's been assigned yet. But let's say he plays some AA this year and goes to AFL and just is great all the way through. I could see them installing him because the Red Sox, there's pressure on them to be good every year. They might have had a down season and they are pretty terrible up the middle. So I could see a Marcelo Meyer story where he pushes his way on. Now, what do you think the team factors are Boston-wise in terms of the past and how they've treated young guys? Tristan Casas has kind of had to push his way in, but they did give Dalbec a chance. I think this is the kind of team that would maybe just say, screw it, like Volpe, we're just putting Meyer in. He's better than Enrique Hernandez. He's better than whatever free agent is out there. We're putting him in now.
Well, I guess when you're grading historical context, are you looking more at what the person in charge of the front office did in the organizations where they previously worked, or what the organization has done in its recent history even before them? Because I would say
the Rays or the Red Sox?
Is Chaim Bloom going to manage Red Sox prospects the way the Rays manage their prospects, or is he more likely to do what the Red Sox did with Rafael Devers and Xander Bogaerts, where I think they were aggressive with both of those guys? I mean, those were phenomenal players, so they were 100% right to be as aggressive as they were. I get the sense Chaim Bloom is very much in the Rays mindset in terms of decision making and promoting players, finding value. All the things he does seem to be much more Raysian than big market, pre Chaim Bloom. Like what was that? Dombrowski that was the GM when they promoted Devers and Bogarts. Was that even one GM before that?
We have a test case in Casas, actually. Check this out. 2021 AAA, 42 plate appearances at AAA, and I talked to him at the AFL. So 2021 AA, AAA, AFL, checked all the boxes, was a top prospect, and I think a position of need going into 2022. But they chose to give Dalbec the first chance and didn't give Casas a chance till the end of the season.
Yeah. So I don't know. I think we've got a few things on our checklist that should help us kind of understand what is more likely to occur with these young players that are battling for an opportunity, seemingly battling for an opportunity in spring, even if what they're proving to their organization is happening over a much longer period of time. Here's a question for you. What do you need to have a great season in 2023? What has to go right? This sort of wraps around the strategies you've used, the players you've rostered heavily, but who really needs to come through? Who are you excited about have a great year, and it's going to propel you to multiple fantasy championships this season? I'm going to guess it's not your most rostered player, because usually the most rostered player you have on your team is someone outside the top 150 overall that just happens to be a good value and fills a need that you create for yourself on a recurring basis.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I have a couple key shares of Masataka Yoshida and Ryan McMahon that I didn't spend a lot for, but I think could be really important. I think good health for Tim Anderson would be important for me in a few places. And then, there's the obvious late pitchers that I want to hit because I have shares of them everywhere, and the model likes them, and that's like Mitch Keller, Graham Ashcraft, Ryan Nelson. There's that class of pitchers that I really need to contribute. But yeah, it's not the same answer everywhere because I have so many different teams. you know. One guy that I'm really fascinated with, and I only have 2 shares of him, but I decided to keep my shares of Jeremy Pena despite some misgivings about his approach, despite some sort of late season really chasing pitches outside the zone, chasing sliders down and away that made me nervous about his future. There are certain aspects you can point to in his profile that are not that exciting. But then he had this great postseason run, and he does have a lot of the skills you do like. He's going to steal 10 plus bases, and he's probably going to hit 20 plus homers, and it's not going to come with a bad batting average. So I think Jeremy Pena could decide my fate in a couple places. For example, in one place, I play in a league that is full of people that used to work for Pitchfork. Most of them have moved on now. And I had a keeper decision. I could keep Tim Anderson in the 3rd round, and the auction calculator said he was worth $14 in our settings. And I could keep Jeremy Pena in the 26th round, and he was worth -$8 in our settings. And I went against the auction calculator. I chose Jeremy Pena. So that decision is one that I will remember and perhaps regret. But Jeremy Pena is definitely a guy I have circled that I haven't necessarily made a bold prediction about, but I've made some interesting decisions in my keeper leagues, deciding to keep him.
We'll do a trivia question because I know you love trivia, and opening day trivia is the best. Who is the most rostered player across the 7 teams I have on the NFBC site this year? I've got him in 5 leagues.
Christian Yelich.
No, I have a decent amount of Yelich, but no. Ramon Laureano.
I have a lot of Ramon Laureano.
I think I have him in both. I did 2 underdog best balls too. So yeah, he's not critically important, but he at least needs to hit his projection, and it'd be great for me if he could go over the projection because it would benefit me in just about
and there's some soft
every
science
league.
reasons he could. I mean, he's really trying to play his way out of Oakland. I mean,
can't blame him.
He'd probably even tell you that if you asked him. He's told me that in not so many words.
I'd bribe him with coffee. You said he's a big coffee guy, right? Really into coffee. Like, yeah, me too, Ramon. Like, I'm into coffee as I've ever been in my entire life because I need it.
Yes, you are right now. You are. What are you up to? How many cups a day now?
I don't count.
You don't count.
I don't count. I don't count. The key thing about parenting that I've learned already is that 1, your coffee cup needs to have a lid on it, and 2, it needs to be well insulated because otherwise you're going to reheat the same cup of coffee 4 times before you drink it. That is absolutely like peak early
you make
days
the cup
of parenting.
Of coffee, and then you have to put out 3 fires, and then your cup of coffee is cold.
That's 100% accurate. I would say the core guys that are really important, the guys I was drafting early a lot. Woodruff ended up on a bunch of teams. He's on 4 of my teams. Will Smith, I was spending up at catcher. He's on 3 of my teams. Eloy Jimenez, so I said I think this is the big breakout year for him at the plate, the consolidation year where he keeps all the skills we've seen over various parts of the last 4 seasons, but he does it over a full season's worth of plate appearances. I think that's going to happen. I at least was able to get out there and get a good bit of Eloy Jimenez. And I think he seems particularly important, because in those instances, it was a really tough call of, can I take Eloy, a guy who's not going to run, or do I have to go for an Edman or an Andres Jimenez, or in some cases, Starling Marte might have still been there. Do I need to get more steals, or can I afford to take a shot on a speedless masher? And I think you really got to come through with the profile Jimenez has if you're going to take a player like that at that price, given all these other factors that have held him back so far?
I've got, I decided that I wanted to fill most of my benches with pitchers. It's the Derek Carty rule. In NL Labor, he's mostly known, in the reserve rounds to take only pitchers in all the reserve rounds, so that he has streaming options and can do all sorts of things, fun things. And so I wanted to do the same thing even in mains and other leagues where most of my bench is filled with pitching, and so that meant that I had to take a multi-eligibility guy for my bench so I could cover as many positions as possible from one bat on the bench. So there is an inordinate amount of pressure on my leagues on two players, Isaac Paredes and Luis Urias. And the reason I have both of them is just as much about their talent as it is about the fact that they have 3 eligibilities. In fact, more once you count CI and MI. You're talking about 4 eligibility guys, basically, maybe even 5 for one of them. So, that sort of thing will hopefully work for me, even if they're not amazing. If they're good enough to back up my guys and give me extra plate appearances and play sometimes, I've also discovered a little bit of value even in some right-handers, like Drury for the, in one case, but even a right-handed outfield like Chas McCormick. What happens is they can be on your bench, and then when to play them. There'll be like 2 lefties in a weekend or something, or you just play them against righties because you don't have any other options. There's an injury. So, those guys tend to get undervalued because everybody wants to have the lefties, but sometimes a righty, in this case, Urias, Paredes, Drury, and Chas McCormick are all righties. You can get value out of them as righties in matchup play and also just as backups.
Yeah, I would say this year, more than any year I can remember, I was targeting the multi-position infielders. Urias and Paredes, definitely part of that group. Gene Segura is going to be a part of that group again because he's going to play third for the Marlins, so he'll be second and third after a couple of weeks. Guys like that mattered a little bit more to me this year because I wanted that extra wiggle room on the bench. I wanted to take a few chances that if it didn't work out, I could easily just straight up replace someone on the wire and go get the best available player and not have to really find a perfect fit. I think that was always something that I struggled with in previous seasons, especially in 15-team leagues, was that if I didn't have enough positional flexibility and someone got hurt, I was stuck choosing from the pool of second base eligible free agents instead of just getting a hitter, the best hitter of the week. It's so much better for your team to be able to just go get the best hitter with the best matchups, regardless of position, because you built in so much flexibility to your roster. So that's something that I did more of this year, and I assume it's going to be something that serves me well, and I'll try to do even more of it going forward.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, it is nice to have 5 pitchers on a 7-man bench. I'll tell you, it is. You start to see how you can carry a Tyler Glasnow in that situation. You can carry an injured pitcher longer. You can play matchups. You're in a short week like this opening week. If you have 5 pitchers on your bench, I think we have 4 maybe in our main, or maybe 5. We are sure to have starters. We even have a choice of starters. We have a start that we're leaving on our bench because we like other starts better. So. That's always useful in weekly leagues, but even in daily leagues, you can really rack up the starts, or you can really be if you have an innings cap, you can be really choosy about who's starting for you.
Yep, and that's a really nice luxury to have because when you're going the other direction, when you're chasing starts off of the wire, you are talking yourself into very bad pitchers because they have good matchups, or very shaky skills in general, or it's a bad path to go down.
Yeah.
I lived it last year in my big auction league, and it was very frustrating to play things out that way. As we get ready to go, it's opening day. We haven't had beer of the beer of the quarter. Can we do beer of the quarter this year? At least we can do beer of the month. Now that I'm back, we'll do beer of the month. It's near the end of March. How about a beer of the month for the people out there? Because I just got an email from Fieldwork, and I'm already thinking about delivery. I'm like, well, I'm not going to get over there. That's not going to happen. But they'll bring it to me because that's what they have out here, and I really like that.
Yeah. Well, I was just at what's it called? Great Harry, I think. Great Harry Bar.
Great
This
Harry,
place. Great
Great Harry's, the Great Harry.
Dark Harry, Cold Harry, Great Harry, Harry Great. Anyway, that was a great segment. Good job. Good radio.
Where were you, and where were you
Yeah,
before
I was
that?
in
I
Carroll
think the
Gardens
story here is
at a
where were
beer
you
at a
before you
beer
went
bar.
to Dirty Harry's or Harry's Dirty Bar or wherever you were.
But we had a Bissell Swish, and I had a Bissell Swish with Niv Shah, who runs Otternu, and we talked about our Otternu basketball season, which is in the midst of concluding. I am battling Chad Young for the finals with my Giannis as my core. And we just talked about things large and small, and Bissell Swish is a Maine hazy, which is excellent. So I will, yeah, and also asterisk my beer staring into the shift is also a beer of the week.
Yes, that was implied at the beginning of the show. I figured that was at least a
Co beers of the
beer
week.
of the month. Yeah,
Even though I haven't
beer.
had it yet, I'm having it tonight.
Yeah, I think it's fair to go ahead and put that up there. But yeah, a lot to be excited about as the season begins, right? Most teams, most fan bases excited about what's going to happen over these next 162 games. Fantasy players out there, of course, excited to see how all the work they put in pays off in the weeks and months ahead. Of course, we've got the expanded feed here this year. We've got a waiver-centric episode coming out on Friday. So Al and I are going to dig into some matchups for next week, some early performers, basically some opening day surprises in terms of role lineup. It's really, really tough to take anything away from one day's worth of games. We're going to do our absolute best. So it's going to be a lot of schedule analysis for the upcoming weeks. Be sure to check that out. If you got questions for us, ratesandbarrels@gmail.com is the email address, the easiest way to reach us. You can also find us on Twitter. Eno is at Eno Saris. I am at Derek Van Riper. If you'd like to sign up for The Athletic, if you don't have that subscription already, it's $1 a month for the first year. It's the best deal that we do all year round, so be sure to jump in on that while you still can. That's going to do it for this episode of Rates and Barrels. We're back with you on Friday.
And last shout out to Lord Bishop at Great Harry Bar. That's what it was called. And thanks for listening.